Hello, everybody. Hi, Michael. Thank
Hi,
you
Olga.
for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. And thank you for being so fast, reacting to my request to join me because you cover the Hill. You are the
Mhm.
founder and independent journalist for Once Upon a Hill. And if anybody doesn't follow you yet on X, it's by Michael Jones. Please go, please subscribe. Also, by the way, I subscribe to Once Upon a Hill. You see it here with the www up front. Sign up and get some quality information, which is really is needed today. And that's what we're going to talk about today, too. So let's address the biggest elephant in the room that's suffocating everybody today. Supreme Court made a decision. Do you want to talk about it? Shall we read it out first? I
Well,
have.
yeah, it's a pretty lengthy opinion, actually. I think that's one of the things that I've also found interesting about the opinion is that it's pretty lengthy. And I think, I think kind of the top line, and you can read some of the, if there's some nuggets or some details that you think are important to the audience, you can read them out. But I think fundamentally, Olga, the important thing to understand is on the last day of the Supreme Court term, the justices put out an opinion. It's a 6-3 opinion, straight down the ideological line. So you've got a conservative supermajority right now of six justices that, typically band together on big landmark cases like this, like not just the Supreme Court, but for overturning Roe v. Wade, affirmative action. All of these cases over the last couple of years have been these 6-3 cases where you've got three, so-called liberals versus these six conservatives. And this particular decision was another one of those. And basically, what they decided in this particular decision, in this ruling, is that President Trump has
No, keep talking.
absolute immunity for official acts that he conducted while he was president. Now, the thing that's a little confusing, Olga, about the ruling is that the court really doesn't explain what official acts are. And so if you go on social media today, there's just a lot of speculation. There are a lot of hypotheticals. There are a lot of questions being asked about what constitutes an official act. And on the flip side, the court said that President Trump does not have immunity for unofficial acts. But again, that goes back to the original question, Olga. What's an unofficial act? What's an official act versus an unofficial act? The bottom line, and the reason that there's so much concern online right now and within the communities that I report for, is Donald Trump has made a lot of, he's promised to be a dictator on day one. He's promised mass deportation efforts. He's promised to, that if, who knows what would happen if a national abortion ban reaches his desk. He's said incendiary things about people of color. So who's to know, if he's willing to, sign pieces of legislation that roll back, civil rights legislations or roll back voting rights even more. And I think the thing that's really concerning for a lot of people is that without guardrails, who knows what Donald Trump would do if he had a second presidency. And so I think that that's the significance of the decision, is that you don't always know what you're going to get with someone like Donald Trump. And with his impulsive nature, no guardrails, a lot of enablers in Congress, which I cover every day, it's just a recipe that could be really, really, really detrimental for American democracy.
And I wanted, to your point, I want to read out some parts here, which is just the basis of this decision. And if you take a look at it and you read through, what they mention is that the official act, right? The matter of the official act is presumptive.
Mhm.
So whenever he does something, or whenever any president decides and announces that decision, we are presuming that this is the official decision in the
Mhm.
best whatever case scenario for United States, right?
Mhm.
And then to your point, 6-3. And those six are nowhere near to be normal conservative as what we used to. And those six will be partially replaced, but some will stay. And also the biggest question is now who is going to replace them? right? So there is, to your point, a lot of confusion. Justice Sotomayor issued her dissent opinion,
Hmm.
where she went all the way in and she said, look, if he here, as you see, if he orders Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate political rival, he's immune. If he wants to be bribed in exchange for pardon, immune. Let the president violate the law. Let him exploit the trappings of his office for personal gain. Let him use his official power for evil ends. And so she went all the way in, and then I saw there was another comment from Supreme Court from the other six where they said, oh, she's basically overreacting. The typical woman response. And if this is happening within the Supreme Court, now what are we going to expect to happen outside of it? Now, what is the most ironic, though, I understand that the MAGA movement is celebrating. That's the biggest win. But who got all those executive powers right now is actually Biden. So is that King Joseph now, or what's happening? I understand he's not going to use them. But what I wish for is for Biden to come out, and he will be speaking today, as you just told me, and I received that letter too at 7:45. Everybody tune in and listen what the president will say about this particular ruling. But I wish he would say what powers he has right now. For instance, declaring MAGA movement as an extremist movement or, terrorist. For instance, banning a convicted felon from running for president. All those tools are there. I'm sure he's not going to go into it just because of the man he is. But those tools are granted to him at this moment, right now, up until January. So it's really super confusing. But to your point, that it brings us way back. And President Biden issued a statement today recognizing 60 years since the civil rights movement. And are we getting back for 60 years or even more? What do you hear from your community, who you report to? How scared are people right now?
I think the thing that's interesting, not just about looking back 60 years, I think what's interesting as decisions like this happen is if you think about how this court is constructed or how this court was constructed, it started with, if you go back to President Obama's um, second term his election really that spurred on the Tea Party movement, and the Tea Party movement planted the seeds of the MAGA movement, and President Obama's election is what started the birther movement, where President Trump entered the political scene, saying that President Obama wasn't to be president of the United States. And then Donald Trump ran for office, got elected, and put 3 justices on the Supreme Court. So if you even look at how we got here because of America's reaction to the first Black president of the United States. And so you don't even have to go back 60 years. You can just go back a decade and a half and look at the response and the resistance from certain corners of the country to the first Black president of the United States, where you have a Senate Majority Leader at the time in Mitch McConnell saying, I'm not going to even let your Supreme Court nominee be heard. Yet I'm going to ram through Amy Coney Barrett when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died and not follow my same principle. So again, we can talk about 60 years of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, but we don't have to go back very far to see how America's reaction, certain corners of the country's reaction to the first Black president has gotten us up to this moment. That's why people are so concerned, because again, I understand that 60 years feels like a long time ago, but I still have, elders in my family who understands what it was like to, be marching for civil rights, and to see all of this democratic backsliding and see all of this work being eroded. Last week, I was at the Capitol listening to some House Democrats introduce a piece of legislation that would restore some voting rights protection. And I listened to Jim Clyburn, who is a beloved, highly esteemed member of the House Democratic Caucus, talk about marching with John Lewis, who's one of the heroes of the civil rights movement. And so he spoke from a first person perspective. So yes, it's worth acknowledging all the progress that we've made in 60 years, but it's important to understand that none of this was inevitable. It happened because people were willing to march, people were willing to boycott, people were willing to vote, people were willing to organize and do all of the things that are important in movement spaces. And on the flip side, those same victories, that same progress, those same wins can be eroded if future generations don't take the baton from these past generations and continue that work and build upon that work. And so you mentioned the communities that I report for. One of the reasons it's so important for me to provide this reporting to these communities is so they feel empowered with the knowledge, with the information that they need to organize their communities, to organize themselves, and to again pick up where these previous generations left off. And so as we celebrate the Civil Rights Act, the 60-year anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, and we talk about the significance of the civil rights movement, I also think that these moments are calls to action, Olga. I think that they're opportunities for generations like mine, generations like Generation Z, and all of the folks that are coming behind us to say, okay, we're in our own, we have our own constitutional crisis right now. We have our own civil rights movement right now. And what are we going to do for? Are we going to apply the lessons that we know worked in previous generations, or are we just going to throw our hands up and say, "Oh no, Trump's running for office again. Oh no, Joe Biden is old. Oh no, the Supreme Court is doing whatever they're doing. Oh no, MAGA has taken over Congress. Oh no, my vote doesn't matter." Or are you going to say, "You know what? One election at a time, one movement at a time, one community at a time." And so I think that that's the opportunity we have. And I think that that's the significance of acknowledging movements like the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act of 60 years ago.
Such a beautiful answer, and thank you for that. Because
Mhm,
when I recall, I grew up in Germany, so I did
mhm,
study Holocaust and sort of the also what led up to it. Because it wasn't an illegal movement by Hitler, right? It was prearranged. This was his constitutional right to do the cleansing, to organize the concentration camps. Same happened with Mussolini in Italy. So if you grant those rights, the unrestricted immunity, so to speak, for a president to do whatever pleases, plus, to your point, Trump is very outspoken as to what he wants to do,
mhm,
because we overreact to that phrase when he was running for the first time, right? Whatever, when he won the first time, not the
mhm,
80s.
mhm.
He said, "I can shut up anybody on Fifth
On
Avenue
Fifth Avenue.
elected." How true is that now,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
And that community who really, I mean, we're discussing whether Biden should be replaced or
mhm,
not, but then nobody discusses whether he should be replaced or not. And
mhm.
even if he has to run from jail, his community will rally
Yeah.
behind him and demand him to run.
Mhm,
And I want to feature some of the responses to the ruling today. We're going to hear from President a bit later, but here's what Hillary Clinton
mhm,
posted today. She said, "I agree with Justice Sotomayor about the immunity ruling from the MAGA wing of the Supreme Court. With fear for our democracy, I dissent. I will be up to them. It will be up to the American people this November to hold Donald Trump accountable."
mhm,
Um, Now, you report on the Hill. Um,
mhm.
Alexandria Ocasio Cortez
Yes.
said that she might be filing. Um, she feels that the Supreme Court is corrupt, and so
Mhm.
today's ruling represents an assault on American democracy. It is up to Congress to defend our nation from this authoritarian capture. What do you hear? Is that reality, or is this sort of a fast reaction that will not manifest into any action behind it?
Yeah, I think, a couple of things are at play here, Olga. I think, the first thing I think, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has a national profile as one of the leading progressives in the House, and people do kind of look to her for guidance and direction on what to do in these crisis moments. And so I do think that it's important for her to signal to the progressive movement, to signal to young people, to signal to communities of color that, hey, we're fighting in Congress. We're not just going to do anything. I think there's another New York member named Joe Morelli who says that he will file. He will propose a constitutional amendment to basically block the rule, basically saying that no president is immune. So there are some proposals from Democrats in the House right now. There's also one other thing that I want to mention, Olga, is that there's also a court reform task force that was just established a month or two ago, and it's a handful of House Democrats who are on that particular. It's called the Court Reform Now Task Force, and it's a group of House Democrats. And there are three pieces of legislation that they're focused on organizing around. One would establish 18-year term limits for Supreme Court justices. Another would enact an enforceable code of ethics. And then the other would term limits, um, term limits, code of ethics, and then there's one more. But there are three pieces of court reform legislation that they're pushing. And so, if folks are interested, there is a reform. There is movement in Congress right now for some of these reforms, and so they're not starting from scratch. And so, I think that that's important for folks to know who are out there, like, oh, I want to do something, or is my member doing something? Check and see if your member's on any of these pieces of legislation, and if not, give them a call and say, hey, I think that the Supreme Court needs to be reined in. I want you to get behind this piece of legislation. On the flip side, Olga, at the end of the day, the true remedy for the moment that we're in, and I know that this, is not sexy and it may, offend some folks who, again, may not believe that their vote matters. But at the end of the day, if you look at the anti-abortion movement, it was Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973. The Dobbs decision came in 2022. You have the anti-abortion movement who experienced setbacks, who spent almost 50 years, 5 decades, organizing, electing members of Congress, electing a president in Donald Trump. They were focused on overturning Roe v. Wade and spent almost 5 decades voting in every single election, organizing, and making sure that even when they had setbacks, that they kept their eye on the prize. There are some folks who say, I won't vote for Joe Biden again because he didn't forgive my student loans. And I think what's interesting about these movements on the MAGA side is that these movements are highly organized, they're well funded, and they're sustained. They're sustainable.
Yes.
There's a guy in Donald Trump's orbit named Steve Bannon, and he's one of the big architects of the MAGA movement. And he has this really popular podcast, and he's actually reporting to prison today for some stuff connected to the January 6th insurrection. But before he went to prison, he talked about the sustainability of the MAGA movement and how the MAGA movement goes beyond Donald Trump. So no matter what happens to Donald Trump, there's a well-funded, organized movement to institutionalize the MAGA movement, to institutionalize Donald Trump's vision and policies. What that means for this moment right now is for folks to understand that even if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez puts these impeachment articles, forces the vote on these impeachment articles, and makes every single Republican have to go on record for what they believe in terms of holding the Supreme Court accountable, at the end of the day, the power is in the hands of the people to organize and to, again, keep your eye on the prize. That if you believe in Supreme Court reform, then it transcends just one election cycle. And it's important for movements to understand that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez may be a leader. Maxwell Frost may be a leader. But at the end of the day, their power comes from the people. They are only empowered because the people say so. And so if the people want to see change, there's also an opportunity for the people to participate in these movements and for the change that they want to see.
And I know I'm overstaying my welcome, but last
Mm-hmm.
question.
Mm-hmm.
Today you posted that you were on a call with somebody who
Mm-hmm.
runs the Biden-Harris campaign. They said that they're shitlessly scared. You also spoke to Jasmine Crockett. Quickly, what was that tweet about? What have you heard today?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking about it. The Biden campaign, the Biden campaign had a press call this morning about an hour and a half after the Supreme Court decision came down on the immunity decision. And so on the call, as you mentioned, were two members of Congress, one Dan Goldman out of New York, and then Jasmine Crockett. She represents a district in Texas, and so they're both supporters of the Biden campaign, supporters of President Biden, and so they were on the call to talk about the implications of the decision from the legislative position, from the kind of from the congressional standpoint, and why it's important for, in their eyes, President Biden to be reelected, so he can nominate justices if there are some vacancies on the bench and get them through Congress. Um, Also on the call was uh, the Biden campaign's deputy campaign manager, and his name is Quentin Fulks. And I'm on a lot of campaign calls. It's election season, so I've been, I'm on at least probably every day at least one campaign call, whether it's a congressional race or the presidential race. And so I hear from Quentin a lot, and he's not someone who speaks in sound bites. He doesn't speak to make news, and so when he was speaking, he was talking about the decision, and he was saying, and again, I'm paraphrasing right now, but he was saying, to be honest, I'm scared as shit. And so that's immediately piqued my interest because again, I cover these folks, and he's not that kind of, he's always on message. He's always, very cool, composed, just has a very, calm demeanor, no matter if the president is up, no matter if the president is down. Quentin is pretty much a steady hand at the wheel. And so it's interesting to me that if, Quentin is willing to say that he's scared of shit over this ruling, then that means something. Also, again, I cover Congress. I talk to Jasmine Crockett pretty much every day. And she's someone who, again, has very, very, very great message discipline. She's someone who, again, is always on message, always knows what to say. And she said that the ruling made her speechless. And she's an attorney. She's someone who went to law school. She used to be a public defender. And so she's very familiar not only with the legal system, but also with how the court works and how laws work. And even the ruling made her speechless. And so that was really fascinating to me, Olga, that you have these folks who, again, not only are great messengers and always on message and great strategists, but um, there was just this sorrow, there was just this solemnness on the call about this decision that this court, there just seems to be no end in sight if Donald Trump wins again. That seemed to be the vibe that I got, that we're at a crossroads in their eyes. We're at a crossroads in American democracy where if we don't want to continue to see have days like today, we've got to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't get to the White House again. That's the takeaway that I had. But it wasn't just what they were saying, Olga, it was how they were saying it that really caught my attention. And so that's why it was important for me to tweet it out, because again, if you're familiar with these folks, or if you want to know how serious the moment is, you've got a high level Biden campaign official, you got a super popular member of Congress who are both saying like, today I'm speechless and I'm scared of shit. And that was really, really interesting to me today.
And thank you for tweeting that, because that's how we connected ultimately.
Right.
And I know I overstayed my welcome, but can
It's
you
okay.
tell us real quick? And we're going to get, for everybody who's watching, we're going to get to discuss the media research that I did, who funds the liberal media and why are we bashing Biden still? And then we're going to talk about Ukraine as well. But before I let you go, can you tell us about Once Upon a Hill? How did you start? How can people support you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Once Upon a Hill is basically a, newsletter. It's an independent newsletter that I write, I report, I publish. And again, it's for diverse communities. It's for folks who feel historically overlooked and historically underserved by the political class. So much of our political media is written for other political insiders. It's written for people who do what I do, or people who work in Congress, or lobbyists. And what I wanted to create is this reliable resource that folks who don't maybe work in Washington, or folks who maybe didn't grow up, paying attention to politics, can understand what's going on in Congress, because Congress is such an important institution. It's the first article that the founders, wrote in the Constitution. So before they gave the president power, before they gave the Supreme Court power, they gave the legislative branch power. They gave Congress power. So it's really important for me to be the eyes and ears for these communities, whether it's women or folks of color, Black and brown communities, or folks with disabilities, or LGBTQ folks, just any communities that feel as though the government may not be working for them, may not understand how Congress works, and don't have the time to, sit down and read the Constitution or read, every bill or every Supreme Court ruling like we did earlier. The idea is really for me to make what's happening in Congress, get inside these halls of power, and make what's happening really accessible for people. And hopefully, with that information, they share it with folks. With that information, they engage their members of Congress. With that information, they feel empowered to vote and they understand how to participate in democracy in a way that feels empowering and not just complaining or saying what they don't like about something. It gives them an opportunity to say, hey, oh, I know who my senator is. So I'm going to call their office and say, hey, I think that you should support this piece of legislation or not. And so, I got to Once Upon a Hill because, I used to work in fashion journalism, and we can talk about that the next time I come on, how I went from fashion journalism to political journalism. But one of the things that I found is that, as I mentioned earlier, none of this is inevitable. All of these decisions are policy choices. It's a policy choice who has health care, who doesn't. It's a policy choice how much Pell Grants are every year for low income folks to go to school. And so, one of the things that was important to me as I learned how policy is made in the creative sector, was to take that experience from the fashion industry and really apply it into a new world to help folks understand that none of this is inevitable. Everything that's happening in America is a choice. It's a policy choice. It's a political choice, and you have power too. So pull up your seat at the table, and that's what I'm trying to do with Once Upon a Hill.
That's beautiful. And thank you for joining me. Thank you for everything you do. Yes.
Thank you.
Quit it.
Have me back anytime, okay?
Thank you so much. And everybody,
Thank
go follow by Michael Jones on X or on social media. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you so much. Take care, okay, Olga?
Thank you. Appreciate you. All righty. So let's continue now with some reactions. And not everything, it's very dark today, and it's very powerful to also understand what's in our hands, and as Michael mentioned, to prepare to vote and prepare to voice your opinion. But some international responses, of course, the meme culture has spoken about the Supreme Court ruling today, and some, for instance, mentioned France demands immediate return of the Statue of Liberty. France also is not doing really well democratically. They Le Pen, Madame, is winning at least the first round of their election. So I'm not sure if Statue of Liberty can be welcomed there. Some people shared this picture, which I think is pretty valid when it comes to the next election. And of course, since the president has the absolute immunity, that sort of, we can see him as the king, right? So it would be, in this case, King Joseph. And that's who we have right now. And some people went really way further and explored the AI option of it and said, you called, I'm here for you. Thank you so much for sending those pictures. But to Michael's point, it's all in our hands. It's not final. And it's also June. Okay. So let's come to the next point. And I did some research, and thank you, really, thank you for liking and sharing and following me. And I follow back. It's not really for me about numbers, how many followers you have versus how many you follow. It's really about community. It's about sharing information. What I mentioned this weekend, what sort of led me to do the research behind who is behind liberal media, because why on earth did liberal media all together decided to bash Biden and to question whether a sitting president, mind you, 9 days or now 8 days before the biggest NATO summit that welcomes Indo-Pacific partners, and as well as Ukraine and Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the countries that are not within NATO, the biggest summit ever, welcomed by our president. Why is liberal media bashing him? Because that continues even today. Is that the biggest takeaway from the debate? That the 90 minutes were not what we expected him to be? That he stutters, that he's old, which we knew before? Is that the biggest news? Nobody has questioned whether Trump has to step out. Nobody has questioned or even mentioned one aspect that really made me wonder who is behind the entire media production, or so to speak, the editor's orders. Because Trump mentioned one thing, that Putin shared with him that his dream was to invade Ukraine. There is no outlet, not a single outlet, that mentioned that up until today. Today is Monday. Debate was what? Thursday? Now, how can this happen? The headlines continue. New York Times today mentioned the road to crisis, how Democrats led President Biden glide into renomination. Were you not there, New York Times, when he was gliding into renomination? Biden's family tells him to keep fighting as they huddle at Camp David. This was a photo shoot with Amy Leibovitz, which is planned months ago. She's not that gal pal that will just run up to you for alibi, or to create some sort of picture for you and for others to believe it. It's been scheduled before. That he has discussions with his family. Don't you have discussions with your family? We all do. Let's not make news where there is no news, but let's discuss what's worth discussing. And that is my point, right? When I look at CNN today, for instance, and this sort of stunned me. First, you see CNN's articles. Biden wages desperate bid to save his re-election campaign after debate debacle. Sad. Meanwhile, same CNN on YouTube. See Biden's fiery speech after shaky debate performance. So, were those, 2.1 million views worth it to call it a super speech? Meanwhile, is that a shaky attempt to sort of reconnect with the audience after messing up on the debate? Are you catering to your different demographics? Maybe on YouTube you have that predominantly liberal following, and on X you want to reach the MAGA movement and Republicans and expand? What is your agenda? So I did some research, which is really public. It's nothing, certified, whatever. Like, it's not a secret information whatsoever. But let's read about CNN. So there is a certain fellow called Malone in 2022. And by the way, I'm not American, so I mispronounce stuff. Deal with it. He mentioned in 2022, he's the billionaire investor with a seat on CNN's board. And I'm looking down because I'm reading it. Okay. He said, I would like to see CNN evolve back to the kind of journalism that it started with, and actually have journalists, which would be unique and refreshing. All good so far. Then he suggested a model. Fox News, in my opinion, has followed an interesting trajectory of trying to have news. I mean, some actual journalism embedded in a program schedule of all opinions. Malone is well known in the pay TV world, where during the 1980s and 1990s, he held more power than arguably any other executive or investor. And for a while, some TV watchers knew who he was as well, when he became a stand-in for everything people hated about cable TV at the time. Al Gore memorably called him Darth Vader on the Senate floor. So this is a guy with a seat on CNN's board. Also, the guy who runs CNN for 2 years openly stated that he wants to see CNN shift towards the middle. But now, are you expanding towards the MAGA world, which is fine. This is your strategy, your company. But any even marketing student or any person with reasonable doubt or actually common sense will tell you that you do not expand to a market that is completely 180 from the current market that you cater to. If you expand to somebody who hated you before, but you cater to them, best case scenario, you will be replacing your viewership and then maybe expanding. So people are not watching CNN. I hear it, I see it. Trump called it fake news. Listen, maybe we all agree now that it is sort of misleading. From what I showed you on YouTube, it's one thing. In printed media, it's another thing. Are you one? Are you talking to each other, or you cater to everybody? Then the next thing was obviously other channels. For instance, NBC. NBC News. I watched it usually thinking it's reliable, but then look, NBC is part of Comcast. Comcast is their parent company. That despite the sanctions, continued business as usual with Russia by pushing propaganda channel RT. And if you haven't watched RT, you will learn a lot about America. Because America apparently really hates Russia, really is envious of Russia and all the bears that are walking there on the streets or whatever. We can't sleep, we can't eat, we just envy Russia for the greatness that they are. This is RT. Now, and by the way, invading countries and taking over Ukraine is totally cool and totally normal there as well. Um, so propaganda channel RT, they pushed it into information space offered by its other company, Xfinity, as of January 2023. Okay, so they kind of ignored the sanctions. In September 2017, RT America was ordered to register as a foreign agent with the United States Department of Justice under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. RT was banned in Ukraine in 2014 after Russia's annexation of Crimea. Latvia and Lithuania implemented similar bans in 2020. Britain has banned RT in 2022. In 2023, Bloomberg published an article on how RT still operates despite sanctions in the EU. And Washington Post came up with an article asking not to ban RT. As for now, RT is available on Rumble, but when I checked, the NBC Universal is still registered as an operating LLC in Russia. There's NBC Universal 1 and NBC Universal 2. Questions, concerns? So next would be a question about Politico, because I see, and this is so weird because when I cover White House and I'm in there, I certainly talk to journalists who are from different publications, including Fox, including New York Post. Very nice, very kind, we help each other, it's all cool. And then I see the articles and I'm thinking, were you watching what I was watching? Were you listening to what I was listening to? Okay, there's editor's orders, there's different directions for every channel, which is fine. But then if you look at Politico, which is very dignified and currently very predominant and very effective in the White House Correspondents Association, when I read what they write, then I get kind of scared. And then I'm thinking, what happened to Politico? Because it was built as an independent company by two former journalists that really wanted to apply sports-like journalism, where you go straight to the point and very short and concise articles that they would be covering politics in that manner. But then Politico was sold in 2021. And who bought it is Axel Springer, who is he's a German, right? He's called a German version of Murdoch. So he's a former Forbes Russia publisher that he had to close down after their editor was murdered. He also runs Bild. This is sort of the Bild Zeitung is another outlet in Germany as well. And here's some quotes about him. And by the way, on X, I posted all my sources, so you can go and read. Public information, again, basic research. Axel Springer's long and well-documented track record of mixing journalism and right-wing politics. Widely referred to as Germany's Rupert Murdoch, Springer ensured his politics were expressed unmistakably in his publications. The Axel Springer's press obsession with scandals and photos of victims of catastrophes, traffic accidents, or other tragedies earned it the recrimination from many corners. The German press council has sanctioned it well over 200 times since 1986, more than any other German publication. So it's paid journalism, it's provocative, it's clickbaity, which now I feel has an effect on Politico. So my point is, while we are, and let's actually analyze what the hell happens in the world right now. We have the invasion of Ukraine. We have the countries uniting to help Ukraine, but first and foremost to help themselves. Because what did happen up until Ukraine was fully invaded, because mind you, Ukraine was invaded in 2014. Crimea was annexed, the republics came by, right? the Donetsk, the Lugansk, those who were taking over, right? This invasion happened in 2014. By the way, under Obama administration, nothing has been done until then. Nothing has been done during Trump administration. So when Trump mentioned that he will end the war in 24 hours, why didn't you do that then when it was easier and it would have been cheaper and faster? If you're master negotiating, why didn't you do it then? Why would you do it now? Can we trust it? Because again, I'm against voting for idols, right? And if you believe in the Bible and you're religious, don't make up an idol. Very clear rule there as well, right? Any religion that you get into. If you're not religious, then you have common sense. Don't make up idols. You are voting for an administration for this, what showing what they have done in those 4 years, because now we're comparing two administrations that both were in power 4 years, 3.5 years. So you can see what they've done. And if it floats your boat and you like it, so be it. And then you're voting for what's promised next. Do you hear from both administrations exactly what is promised? Or are you following somebody whom you're idolizing? How do you account for your interests to be defended, to be presented, and to be achieved and manifested? Can you go with either choice? And that is the question here. Because that full immunity that was granted today is not just to Trump or any president, it's also to Project 2025. And if you read it, and by the way, yesterday was BET Awards, and they spoke about Project 2025 and how it is illegal to be homeless, and dive into it. There are a lot of summaries. I even on X posted a summary by a lady who did a good job sort of summarizing the biggest issues and concerns about Project 2025, and I will attach it under this video. Read through it. Dedicate some time, because that full immunity is granted to that stuff too. Because people who wrote Project 2025 also were part of appointing the justices that voted today. Let's just have some clarity check. Let's just really realize what is happening. And so back to the world. Invasion of Ukraine, a big threat was China in terms of invading Taiwan. And now US is in the middle. And what are we doing? What Biden did and his administration did, with the help, of course, of Blinken and Austin, united 50 countries together to help Ukraine. Now, the money that was allocated to Ukraine, which also has to be discussed, 98% of it never reached Ukraine. It was used to replenish and refresh Pentagon stockpiles and send the old stuff to sell it to Ukraine, right? So the money is allocated to, let's say, Pentagon, other part of US government that buys from Pentagon so Pentagon can get new stuff in. That's what this entire bill, right, the recent bill, 60 billion, whatnot, is about. So if you study it, it's not donation to Ukraine. It's really to prepare us for any potential conflict. And that conflict has really high potential right now. So the NATO summit that unites not just NATO countries, which is North Atlantic region, but also welcomes at least 3 Indo-Pacific partners, where it will be discussed. And US did a really good job. If you haven't paid attention, did really good job. Both Secretary Blinken and Austin, who traveled into Indo-Pacific and had security agreements with Philippines, with Japan, and other Indo-Pacific partners, that in case of Chinese invasion of Taiwan or any other provocative actions, that there will be unity on that side as well. And then we heard from the Chinese side that now they see it as provocation, as sort of expansion, same as Russia was saying that NATO is expanding now and they have to be defending themselves. So the provocation is everywhere. Now realize, is it worth it to question the sitting president who will be talking to all those world leaders in a week in Washington, D.C.? Is it worth it to question whether he is physically or mentally there? And I would imagine that those leaders will be traveling to DC and saying, well, this guy is just old. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. He doesn't even know I'm in front of him because Fox News told me. And by the way, CNN told me the same thing. Who am I talking to? Why would I even listen to what this guy says? Do I need to sign any agreements? why are we doing this sadomasochistic moves if it hurts us? First and foremost, if you worry about election, and if you're on the MAGA side, be you. It's June. The election is in November. Do you really need to kill our nation's interests right now? That's the biggest question, for me at least. Now let's talk about the debate. Biden's administration, or Biden-Harris campaign, issued or put this statement online. They counted all 50 of Trump's lies. You can read it here. They finally sort of started discussing campaign not from the perspective of apologies, right? I'm not that young anymore. I don't walk that well anymore. I don't debate well anymore. I'm excusing myself, but I will promise to fight better, right? That's what Biden said at the fundraiser right after the debate. Take a look, just quick. Oh, that was just a picture. Okay, wait a second. I have it. Here you go.
Except he's just a liar. Look, folks, what's going to happen over the next couple of days is they're going to be out there fact-checking all the things he said. I can't think of one thing he said that was true. No.
So, and we listened to that before. So now they issued all 50 Trump's lies. This is publicly available. You can look at it. So the campaign is now going more on the offensive rather than on defense, which is welcomed. Right now, talking about the situation in the world, we discussed in Ukraine as there's an issue, in the Indo-Pacific there's probable issue, within the United States is a big blah, 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 blah. And we have the NATO summit, right? But then there's also entities. Ukraine is discussing to their accession or to join EU, right? European Union. Now, who runs the EU this month is this guy, Hungary. Hungary is holding its presidency over the EU. And by the way, they adopted a new slogan for Hungary. It's called MEGA, Make Europe Great Again. Does it ring a bell? Yes, it does ring a bell. And so their narrative is not to participate in actively defending Ukraine, not to participate within, any sort of responsibilities within the European Union that would be affecting and benefiting Ukraine. And they are now running the presidency. They assume the presidency of the EU, right? Now, they're not running the budgets, but what they decide on is what will be discussed, what will be vetoed, and so on. So, unfortunate. Now, let's come back to New York City. I worked for UN before. I still don't know, honestly, up today, right now, I don't know the benefit of UN. I will be standing right here in front of you and stating it openly. Who benefits from UN? Because I get every day, I get briefings that this many kids were killed in Ukraine and tortured and raped and sold. And all of that is discussed in Security Council that I worked in, by the way. Then we're reading about Israel and Palestine, and we see that somehow UN folks were helping Hamas. Can we figure out what's with UN? Who is it benefiting? What is the point of it? And also, here's a post by UN, by the way. Russia assumes the rotating presidency of the Security Council for the month of July. Again, they can veto stuff, they can change the agenda, they can bring up stuff to the agenda. By the way, their general just traveled to New York, parked right next to Trump plane. Their official Russian Federation plane was parked in DC right next to Trump's plane. Whether it's connected or not, let me stay corrected, we don't know. But he was in New York, and he was bringing up issues like how Ukrainian soldiers are torturing Russians. Let's discuss that at the UN. Is that worth it? What is UN for? What are the agendas? I know there's a lot of talking, and there's a lot of disapproval of invasion, disapproval of this. What do you do? Because when all the leaders will again meet in September at the UN headquarters, what will be discussed? For NATO, there is quite an agenda now for the NATO summit that will be in 1 week. They will be discussing Ukraine. They will be discussing defense. They will be discussing also each country's part that they play within NATO, right? Because there was a rule to dedicate at least 2% of countries' GDP to NATO, and now 23 countries are doing that. So this is a welcomed move, and they will be increasing that. For instance, Estonia is already giving 3% of their GDP. Of course, countries matter, or country size differs. But again, this is the rule that they employed. They will be discussing that. And there will be also more security agreements also discussed. And for instance, today, Secretary Blinken, Secretary of State, had a, what was it? Was it a conference? He was at a conference and he spoke. It was like an interview format. Then he had a Q&A. And he was asked about Ukraine and the defense, because what Ukraine really needs is air defense, and whether F-16s will be there, and whether Ukraine will get enough of it. So let's listen to what he said.
Now, of course, for both its military capacity and its economic capacity, you've got to make sure that you have air defenses in place to try to protect the areas in which you're making investments. We're driving that. I think you'll see more news on that in the coming weeks as we get to the NATO summit, actually next week.
And you know what really hurt me a little bit listening to this? As a Ukrainian-born American citizen, let's listen to this again.
Now, of course, for both its military capacity and its economic capacity, you've got to make sure that you have air defenses in place to try to protect the areas in which you're making investments. We're driving
to protect areas that you make investments in. Okay. Postal office in Ukraine was hit today. I don't have this picture attached, but I have it here. That's what remains from it. It's the biggest missile. It's called KAB 500. It hit a whole postal office in Kharkiv. And that's among other targets in Kharkiv and other targets in Ukraine. And so I understand that we need to protect investment that will be done into Ukraine when the peace deal is there. But whatever he said, maybe he meant it well. Honestly, I like Blinken. I like what he does, how he does it. But that was a little, okay, interesting. And so he was asked by the host, how does the end look like for Ukraine? What's the end effect? So let's listen in.
The end result is a successful country, and a country that, as it stands on its own in these three areas, is the strongest possible rebuke to Vladimir Putin.
Nobody mentions achieving the territorial integrity from 1991. So are we returning occupied areas, or are we giving them out now just to receive a peace deal? Let's just have an update. I guess this update will come in a week at the NATO summit. But when I'm listening to this video, and again, I really, I support what Blinken does and how he does it. But protecting investment, now we're not mentioning territorial integrity anymore. I recognize that. And maybe I'm biased because I am from Ukraine and my parents' house was invaded, bombed, and whatnot. So the cemetery of my grandparents. Maybe I'm biased because I listened to it too carefully, but that's what I noticed. Let me know if you noticed that too. And I want to pay attention to somebody who is very, very special to Ukraine and who has unfortunately passed away fighting for Ukraine's freedom, fighting for Ukraine's sovereignty. He's from South Africa, from what I understand, but he always said he's a British soldier. I guess he's also from Britain, or I know what that connection was. But I followed his videos on X, and I want to share some videos of him because he made such a good point. He protected so many people as a medical professional. He fought for Ukraine, and he was very outspoken, very honest. So here's a video where he was fighting for our Congress in the US to give the money to Ukraine. So tune in.
We are soldiers fighting against a tsunami of iron and molten metal. We don't have the tools to hold back the Russian invasion and the genocide that is happening in Ukraine. We are at your mercy. Stand with us, stand with Ukraine, because we will stop this invasion where it is. We will stop it from coming to your doorsteps, to your children, to your homes. Your basements don't have to be torture chambers. Ukraine will do this. All we need is your weapons. All we need is your ammunition. And we don't need it now. We need it yesterday. This is not a joke anymore. This is not a time for dilly-dally. This is not a time for procrastination. This avalanche will only gain momentum if we don't stop it, and we can only do it with your help. Please, man, for the sake of humanity, for the sake of freedom, for the sake of life, and for the sake of not letting this go into a full-scale European epidemic, pandemic, catastrophe, Armageddon, please stand with Ukraine today.
And here's a video that he shared. I think it's one of his last videos, when he spoke exactly about the issue that I just spoke about, that Ukraine is not allowed to strike Russian airfields. So what does happen, for instance, if you think about Kharkiv, where my family is from, it's really by the border with Russia. So what US is allowing is for the weapons to be used for defense on the Ukrainian land, right? So it's not allowed to strike back. Then there was an update that Ukraine is now allowed to strike 100 kilometers into Russia, because the idea is to hit the parts of Russia where the missiles are shooted to hit Ukraine, right? And I'm explaining it very, very simple, so anybody who really doesn't know anything understands, right? But then it was reported that an airfield, and it's called Baltimore, not to confuse with our Baltimore, it has without an E at the end, Baltimore. That's where Russia openly has all the planes stationed there, ready to hit Ukraine. And somehow Ukraine is not allowed to see this as an evident military target and hit it. So Pete Fauché, and if I mispronounce it, my sincere apologies, but he spoke about it in one of his very last videos before he passed away. So let's listen to this.
This latest, absolutely laughable rule. Kharkiv can only defend Kharkiv region border or shoot just inside the enemy territory of Kharkiv. Ludicrous. So the rest of Ukraine has to take it up the backside. The rest of Ukraine has to be vaporized, while just a little bit of Kharkiv can defend a little bit of Kharkiv. By this idiotic logic, what they're saying is, if I have a house and there are two children in that house, and a bad man is coming in the middle of the night to do something to those children, I can only defend against the bad man that comes through the front door. The bad man that comes through the back door, he can have his way with my child.
It's really the best people, the best men who are dying in Ukraine and defending Ukraine, because what Russia does is recruiting, prisoners and those who convicted, are murderers. But what Ukraine does, you have not just military folks, but you have regular business people, professors, teachers, artists go and fight and die. And so truly rest in power, Pete. Ukraine gained an angel. We all did. And we're forever grateful. So I'm not really eager to finish on such a sad note, but it just has to be said, as long as we're fighting, how the debate were and what were the optics and what happened and what didn't, and whether Biden was prepared well. And by the way, now allegedly, again, because that's the printed media is reporting it, that allegedly he said, she said, the mother of the father of the brother of the cat was there and said that Biden's family is now blaming his aides for preparing him in a wrong way for the debate. And honestly, I wanted to share, very last thing for today, share an idea how I would suggest Biden to prepare. Because the aide, right, as they assume, who prepared Biden, helped 6 presidents. or during 6 election seasons to prepare presidents, Democratic presidents, for candidates for the debates. And if you count back, what is it? You arrive at Clinton times. This is where people spoke differently, where media was different, and where people behaved with each other differently. So there, really talking about stats and policies and accomplishments was valid, because I recently shared, Ronald Reagan's answer about his age when he was at the debate, and he said, "I will not use the age factor against my opponent and pinpoint that he's too young and too inexperienced," which was the moment where Reagan actually won. And even his opponent said that where he realized that's when it was over. But this type of communication is not valid right now, because Biden is not running against somebody who will be talking about facts and reciting policies and accomplishments. It's more about clickbait. It's more about delivering highlights for social media. It's more about trolling and really personality and charisma. So what I think Biden should do is really focus on that, right? If people want a show, if they want a show by Joe, then it should be a show. And then he can, after the debate, he can have and deliver a live conference where he would say, "Look, we just had a show. We all had fun." He said, "I said, we pinpointed. This was fantastic. Social media is, satisfied. But now let me recite what my policies are. What have I achieved? What I'm planning to do next." Because this is not the type of information that will ever be possibly shared in a debate with Donald Trump, who is there to share his charisma and to incite everybody and, entertain. Right? So if you go to a show and you pay for a show, you want to have a show. If people want a show, then Joe or President Biden has to certainly consider delivering it. As they say in marketing, there's no problem with a ballet. There is not a problem with a rock concert. There's only a problem if you're selling a ticket for ballet and there is a rock concert, and vice versa. So just something to keep in mind. Thank you so much for watching today. This was cool. We see each other tomorrow. I always will try to come live between 5 and 7, depending when we get the latest news. Don't forget, now it's 7:08, 7:45. Biden will talk about today's ruling, which I expect to be a statement. But to Michael's point, who joined me today, and thank him again for joining me, it's all in your hands. It's all in our hands. It's in your hands. And whether you are for Biden or for Trump, it's in your hands. But what I want you to really keep in mind, you don't vote for a candidate. You vote for administration. You vote for your principles and your interests to be represented. Just keep that in mind and then decide what's right for you. Okay? Thank you so much. See you tomorrow.